Got another really good agenda today, but we're going to start in our usual place with roll call. So let's just go around the horn. Usually we do kind of official members and ex officio, but we've got kind of a good sort of mix up here today. So we'll just start over here and then work our way around.
Oh, hi everyone. I'm Allison Platt, City of Bend staff.
Sharon Smith, Bend Lapine Schools representative. This is my last meeting. Doug Pigman is going to be taking over for me.
Doug Pigman, schools.
Elisa Chang, are we supposed to do conflicts of interest now too?
Well, I guess we'll go around and do that
Again?
Yeah. And I'm Corey Harlan, the chair, Central Oregon Land Watch.
Dale Van Valkenburg representing Brooks Resources.
John Halen, I'm on site wearing a blue checkered collared shirt.
Elaine Fridella.
Elisa Heim, owner of Big Story Bookstore.
And Rachel Colton with Ben Park and Rec.
And who do we have joining us online today? Looks like.
Hi, it's Sarah Odendahl with the Bend Chamber of Commerce.
And then it looks like Councilor Perkins has joined us as well. Welcome. And do I need to kind of list through the other folks, or I think that's good. I don't think anyone else is joining us.
Yeah,
today.
I know Kathy, John, and Jeff all can't attend today, but we still have a quorum. So thanks for everyone. Thanks everyone for confirming.
All right. And sorry, feeling rusty today. A lot of this, there's been a few things going on this week, I think, for everybody. Let's go ahead and do conflicts of interest disclosures too. So sorry, please bear with me and we'll go around the horn one more time.
Sharon Smith, Bend Lapine Schools, no conflicts.
Doug Pigman, Bend Lapine Schools, no conflicts.
Elisa Chang, Ben Bikes, no conflicts.
Corey Harlan, Central Oregon Land Watch, no conflicts.
Dale Van Valkenburg, my aforementioned employer owns property at 100 Northeast Hawthorne and 180 Northeast Franklin Avenue within the core area.
John Halen, I own a business in the core district.
Elaine Fridella.
Potential conflict of interest. Sorry, I forgot to say that. My bad.
Jumped on. Elaine Fridella, no conflict of interest.
Elisa Heim, potential conflict of interest, owning Big Story Bookstore on Greenwood and 3rd.
And Rachel Colton, Ben Park and Rec, no conflict of interest. Sarah Odendahl, Bend Chamber of Commerce, no conflict of interest.
Great. Thanks, everybody. We'll go ahead and move on to approving our meeting minutes. I'm sure everyone had a chance to review those. Riveting, as always, our work here. So I'm looking for approval for our meeting minutes from our last CAB meeting, and then we'll move on to the subcommittee.
Actually, it's 2 meeting minutes. It was I think the September and the October meeting minutes of all of CAB. And then we did send out some subcommittee meeting minutes, but we only have one subcommittee of the 3 here today. So we'll pause approving those until CAB can reconvene.
Great, thanks. And so could I just see a show of hands for approval of the minutes, both for September and October? Okay. We don't need a motion anymore, I've been told. So
I've been told we can streamline the process by legal staff.
Okay. Well, thanks for that. We'll go ahead and defer on the subcommittee meeting minutes till our next time we're all together. And that brings us to our next agenda item, which is a core area budget update. And it looks like Jonathan Taylor is going to be walking us through that. Welcome.
House today. So we got our budget numbers in on October 15th. And we had 3.84% assessed value growth. So comparatively to last year, which was 0% growth. Some of the source. So one thing that I've done over the last 2 weeks is I met with the county assessor. We've gotten every parcel from the core area and we've really delved into the numbers. So I'm not going to bore you with all that. So there's 1,128 parcels or properties in the core area that we get assessed value from. But this is a little of misnomer of where our value increment is coming from. So we broke it down. So standard tax growth, ballot measure 50, the 3% annual every year, that accounts for 87% of the growth in the core area. Utility assessments or centrally assessed properties, which is handled by the Department of Revenue in the state, that accounted for 11% of our assessed value growth, but only new development accounted for 2%. Oh,
Yeah,
you
you
have
don't
it.
have control, sorry. And just, I think wanted to note on this slide too, that the utility assessments we're finding that they're highly volatile. And so, while this year it was high at 11%, that's not always consistent. So just something to,
Could you explain what those are?
Yeah, so if you'll go back, Allison. So centrally assessed properties, they're handled by the Department of Revenue. So the county assessor does not do anything.
Just the utility parts.
Yeah, so let me
okay.
get to that. So just explaining how the assessment works. Because it's handled by the Department of Revenue, they classify it as centrally assessed properties. And that looks like train tracks, franchise agreements with utilities, whether that be like, what is it called? Those Wi-Fi routers that provide Wi-Fi, right-of-way properties, water lines, sewer lines, natural gas lines, those type of things. Just for comparison purposes, Murphy's Crossing was a 4% utility growth. Juniper Ridge is 8%. That's because Pacific Court new building is going in the Juniper Ridge area. I don't have data for the last year, but moving forward, we'll have this data moving forward. So we'll be able to better manage what actual growth is occurring. So as projected, minimal new growth occurred. So we were pretty much in line. Only 2% of the new increment was generated by development that has occurred. 47% was,
we kind of flipped.
yeah, you flipped it on me. Okay. So only 47% of that 2% was actual new development. The rest of it was market rate changes, which is what we code. Oh, I'm sorry. Coding, like land use changes, zoning, market changes, reassessed values by the assessor. So of the two new developments that are occurring in the core area where one is, the new increment is generating, it's Jack Straw. So in 2 years, that'll be tax exempt. So no new growth.
Portion.
Yeah.
A big portion will be taxed.
So in response, you've heard over the last year in April and again in August, Borough is going to be developing investment strategies amongst our core area, Juniper Ridge and Murphy's Crossing tax increment areas. And part of that is to really generate returns. And so we're developing a primer for our board members, which is like roles and responsibilities. We're developing who our stakeholders are, which is the taxing districts, because they forego taxing revenues. So we're trying to pivot into the model of how do we generate more returns for them at the end of the plan document, but then also on the other side, what is the product we're providing? And that's for our residents, businesses, and community members. And so we're hoping that in Q1 and in tandem with the goal setting, council goal setting, borough goal setting, this will all kind of come to fruition in Q1. So the goal is to really start generating increment where we're seeing no growth occurring. Questions? No? All right.
And then I think just to kind of translate like what this means or what we're sort of recommending is not reinitiating the business assistance program at this time or making any finding any additional expenditures, especially given the increases that happened to the Second Street project, the desire to fully fund Franklin and not having a full project estimate for Franklin until the spring of next year. And really kind of focusing kind of developing more of that investment strategy plan in coordination with Borough through that council goal setting process. And we'll have a discussion in your next agenda about council goal setting and the feedback that you'd like to provide to council to both help inform council goals at large, but also this investment strategy. And then kind of we could reevaluate in the summer of next year of kind of, is there any additional projects that we would want to fund or reserve funding to support?
And, go ahead.
I had a question. What would a goal percentage growth that is good be?
3 is sort of like minimum ideal. And yeah, Jonathan can kind of.
Part of the investment strategy is we're not trying to allocate a specific dollar amount to any kind of awarded projects. We're trying to identify where revenue is stable and then kind of providing between 2025 and 2027, an amount of money that Borough could utilize to spur growth, because also we're going to divvy about 25% of the increment into a reserve fund because we need reserves. So case in point, right now, what we're doing is we're taking $1 in and we're basically spending the dollar back out. We're not actually capitalizing on the dollar return. So in the coming months, we're going to be working on that strategy with you, with Borough, with our community members, just to identify long-term. It's more in the next year as an exploratory phase of what programs we could do.
Yeah, John, I think my question just had to do with sort of like, are there kind of top of the list investment strategies that we know are of interest and that we're going to see, right? I know that it could be like things like incentives, it could be barrier removal, right? Like, are there specific things at this point that, you know, are sort of top of the heap, low hanging fruit that are sort of coming to mind for sort of what should be in that an investment strategy like that? Like, because it is all about like spurring the private development, right? So just want to,
Yeah, so
if you have any detail
Yeah.
to kind of sort of flesh out for the group, like what we actually are talking about when we talk about
Sure.
like those kinds of
So
things.
nothing's in stone, right?
Right.
But some of the top 3 things that we're looking at, obviously, is that site-specific tiny TIF that we've all been working on for the last year. That's priority number 1 for Borough and Council, is to get that off, being successful and having returns for the community. Other things that we're going to potentially explore is a small business revolving loan fund with low interest rates, kind of keep that as a sustainable fund. Another thing could be a market rate study. We were talking about this yesterday, like what neighborhood services does the core area need and not need, and how can we incentivize that? And then just a general land development strategy. So I'm working with Matt. We'll have a formula that we'll use for assessed valuation versus potential tax revenue generation. And we're going to start on the basis of like understanding the market first. So I think that maybe next year is kind of doing some studies of like what is needed, and then moving forward, incentives, loans, grants, stuff like that. So holding pattern for right now, but then kind of having a true strategy that we can just implement based on the plan document. And how do we do it in the next 2 to 3, 5 to 10, and then 20 plus.
Great. And I think just one additional comment on pausing the sort of business assistance program, sort of in light of trying to maximize sort of those strategies that are going to get us the most bang for the buck. I think that a big reason why we had that was about trying to counter the the gentrification issues and the displacement issues that are prevalent when you're doing redevelopment. And so I guess my hope would be that as we have conversations or we're shifting away from that program specifically, that there is, that is something that we're accounting for and looking at when we put strategies together, because I do think we're going to have to be pretty intentional about kind of supporting the folks who are already there and ensuring they thrive through, this redevelopment phase.
So just clarification, right now, the small business grant is still on the potential of like continuing that.
Okay.
We're not, at this time, we're not recommending elimination or cutting funding. It's just
Okay.
when we launch it, how do we launch it with other programs that generate returns for Borough, but also, to your point, meets community needs and goals. So nothing's off the table. We're not
Okay.
taking anything off right now.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Were there other questions from folks? Okay. Well, we'll move on then to our council goal discussion. So this is for our new council, which will be seated in January, I believe. They do a biennium sort of goal setting, so for 2025 through 2027. And we're going to talk through a bit about what CAB might want to see put forth in that discussion for council's consideration. So Allie's going to walk us through that, and we got about 45 minutes or so for this particular part of our agenda.
Yeah, and I did just want to take a moment to introduce Kate Schneider, who was recently promoted to be the city's executive policy officer. I don't know, Kate, if you want to come up at all and kind of talk about the council goal setting process. I didn't really prime Kate to do this. Hopefully she's okay going off the cuff, but I think Kate's going to be leading the council goal process. And so I wanted to kind of invite her to listen into your discussion today so that she could also like help carry some of those ideas forward as they're actually drafting goals. But we have time to have like kind of a robust discussion about what are some of those council goals that you would like to identify for council. And then Kate is planning on hosting sort of a advisory board summit. So maybe I'll let her talk about that.
Yeah, so nice to meet you all. I'm Kate Schneider, she, her. And as Ellie said, the council goal process, if you've observed it or been through it in previous years, probably a lot will feel familiar, but we are planning a new engagement event specifically for our advisory boards and committees and commissions this year. So we're calling it a Board and Council Summit and planning it for January 14th, which is a Tuesday at the Council on Aging. And you'll get officially, Ally will share that invite with you. But really it's a chance for you to sit at tables with members of council. So we're planning to have you sit in the round so you can talk. And the big piece is that we'll be asking you to fill out a pretty simple template, just sharing with the council your top accomplishments from this year. So what you'd highlight, like top 3 things. And then as you think about council going into goal setting, what's top of mind for you as an advisory body. So suggestions, priorities, really what you would like the council to think about as they head into their goal setting. So that's what you'll be working with Ally to pull together in the next couple months. And then we'll have that in the written record for goal setting. And then that summit night, you'll get a chance to actually share it out and share in front of the other advisory boards so you can each hear what each other is working on too. So thanks for letting me be a fly on the wall today. And we are, our communications office is working on a whole timeline of everything that'll be part of goal setting. So we can also share that out too. But thanks so much for your input in advance.
Thanks so much, Kate.
And just like a little bit more technical details. So this is kind of the last time that we may meet as CAB prior to that January 14th summit. So do you want to have kind of a robust discussion to gather CAB input into that? There's like a very slight chance that we would meet before January 14th, but I don't think that we will. So we also want to identify, you're all invited to attend that summit, but we also want to identify sort of a speaker for CAB at the summit to speak to some of the things that you identified today. So the first question that I kind of wanted to dive into is just what do you think CAB's 2024 or recent accomplishments were that you want to share with council? And then we can maybe gather some thoughts on that and then move to the second question.
Was it 2024 when we approved or distributed the funds for the business development?
Yeah, I mean, you approved them in 2023, but then the actual disbursement has taken place over 2024.
I think that would be an accomplishment.
And we can put together like more stats on what we supported
Right.
yeah.
Thoughts from others? I know.
What
it's-
did we do this year?
Well, we, oh, go ahead.
Sorry.
No, please, go ahead.
We didn't do it, but the grant for the bridge. We started talking about it and
So I think like the People Streets study, right, is definitely of interest. And we talked about that, I think, during our last like CAB meeting. But I don't know in terms of like our specific role there, other than being like supportive. I think arguably, depending on people's perspectives, right, like moving forward with some of the key investments for Midtown Crossings, right? Like I'd put that in the bucket of accomplishments of actually getting those projects rolling. I know we had a healthy discussion about sort of what that could be in the design and all of that, but I do feel like moving those things forward is an accomplishment. So I'd probably throw that in the ring. I don't know how the subcommittee meeting went on the sort of like barriers discussion. So I don't know if that like arrived in a meaningful place or not about some things that some solid recommendations that might come from that. But I imagine that might be one as well.
I think some barriers were identified. And they go into different categories of, things that we can probably control to some extent and other things that we really can't. But, we had everything on the table and heard some good case studies, I guess, or lived experiences of people who have done project or attempted to do projects in the Central District and run into some difficulties. We'll be addressing.
Yeah.
That'll be 2025.
Do other folks have thoughts, other accomplishments that stand out? I know we had some, challenges with our forecast and our budget early on. So that, definitely was something that we were navigating around, but I think there were some things that we did accomplish together. I would also say, I feel like helping with the tiny TIF, right? Like providing some direction there and really trying to kind of help the city get to a good place where they're considering new tools and trying new tools like MUPD and also sort of lessons learned and being able to pivot off and try other new things. I think that could probably also like live in this bucket of meaningful work accomplished.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because when you say accomplishments, I think of things that you check off of a list as far as like a project or something. But when I think about things that we've accomplished, I think being an ear for businesses in the core district or people that are in the core district is a accomplishment. Like it was really great to have, Marco come in here. It was great to talk about, Gleason Market. It was great to talk about Franklin and Greenwood improvements and that kind of liaison. And I think it's just a comfort for people to know that there are people specifically focused on that area that are there to listen and also looking out for that area. So it's not necessarily an accomplishment, but it's a soft accomplishment, I guess.
Support.
So I'm brand new, so let me leave that as a caveat. Was there at the beginning of the year a list of goals for CAB that we should be looking at and saying how we did against that original list?
We had a work plan, and part of it was the kind of the securing the funds for the CFEC, the kind of People Street Study Grant, the business assistance subcommittee work, and then the development code subcommittee work. Those were kind of the three main areas. And then I think continuing to monitor the CIP and the Midtown Crossings work. So you've kind of touched on all of the things that were part of the work plan.
So if we were going to put a percentage against goal, what was accomplished, would that be, what percentage would that be? Roughly.
I would say they're all sort of still in progress. None have been completed. I would need to put more thought into specific percentage amounts for each one.
Just curious in terms of being able to say,
Yeah.
we accomplished 80% of what we set out to do, or whatever that number might be.
Well, we did
And that
fully
could-
fund the business assistance program that we set out to do, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So that'd be 100% of that.
People Streets is in progress. Grant was gotten.
And I'm blanking on the term, they're not benchmarks, they're,
Performance measures.
thank you, performance metrics that.
Yeah, we did do the annual report that we can also share with council.
What was met or exceeded there, yeah.
Well, I think there's been some good, partnerships. The Bend Central District, has kind of resurrected. I think most everyone in this room was at their event that they hosted to kind of bring people together and to improve collaboration. I think anytime that we can be parts of those sorts of things, we're better together, right? So it's great to see that synergy and the other groups that we are engaging with to make change in the core area.
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of like sustained interest and momentum and investment, right, is really like that's the big goal, right? And so it's like, are we accomplishing that in a big sense? Yes. And then I think to your question about like, we set out a work plan for ourselves. We did all of the things or are doing all of the things that are in our work plan. So in terms of like, how are we doing on sort of our accountability on that front, I think quite well. But I think to Ally's point, some of that work is going to spill over and continue into 25 when we put our work plan together, because a lot of these things have kind of an ongoing nature or longer timeline. So.
Which I think it makes sense, right? I was looking at the council goals before this in preparation, and like, there are a lot of things that are still in progress, and like, at least same thing with our goals and priorities from strategic plans and morphing over, like, I expect some of those things to move forward and may still be relevant for the council.
Yeah, thanks, folks. Let's see. Other folks we haven't heard from. Any other ideas or thoughts to lob in? How about folks online? Sarah? Good. Okay.
So I'm kind of drafting some of these things that you noted. And then I'm going to share the screen so we can kind of look at them all.
Sounds good.
We can probably include like the amount of the business assistance loans. To
Yeah.
Detail.
So key successes, CAB distributed funds through the business assistance grants, and we can staff will add more specific dollar amounts and kind of impact amounts. related to that success. Kind of initiating Midtown Crossings projects. So Hawthorne is now fully funded primarily through grants. Greenwood pilot is complete. Second Street has started construction and Franklin corridor is being designed. CAB has started to identify barriers to adaptive reuse projects in the BCD, supported council consideration of the TIF housing affordability and employment growth policy, and also supported the city in securing a grant for People Street planning and additional evaluation of the Juniper to Drake Park case study. That's a lot. Any other additions or things that you would maybe want to, like the order seems,
I think that's great. I do appreciate the point about performance metrics, right? Like we go to great lengths to gather all this data to report out to the community and others about how we're doing on these really kind of key things that we've identified. So couldn't hurt to, look there and reference those and put those forth.
okay. So then moving on to the second question, which is really what CAB priorities would you like to identify to share with City Council in advance of their goal setting? So, what input or suggestions do you have to council? And then I think recognizing that CAB both makes recommendations to the Bend, you're primarily a Bend Urban Renewal Agency Advisory Board. So what specific ideas do you have for Borough as it relates to an investment strategy for the core area, or things that you would like Borough to really focus on for the core area as well as City Council? And if you don't need to necessarily understand what exactly falls under the purview of City Council or Borough, we can help you navigate that. But just recognizing that the Urban Renewal Agency is more, the urban renewal TIF management and kind of redevelopment investment arm. And City Council's more policy.
Yeah. Okay. Can I see a show of hands of who wants to throw some things in the ring here just so I can manage time? Does everybody have something they want to throw forth on suggestions for the most part? Okay. We'll go ahead and start with CAB members and then we'll move on to our ex officios. So why don't we start over here with Elisa?
I didn't have anything.
You're nothing specific. Okay. Dale, over to you then.
Well, I think our 2024 accomplishment of starting to identify barriers was, that we got a very slow start on that. The meeting kept getting bunched back. So we've really just kind of started to scratch the surface of what those issues are. I think looking at our budget and how little we're getting out of development or redevelopment, I think those are a really high priority, is to identify those and get them taken care of. So, there's some land use code stuff I think we can do that would be fairly straightforward on, lowering the bar for, maybe it's raising, figuring out what trips a site plan review and what doesn't. Because it's a big problem is identified is if you have to go through a site plan review, that's going to be a stopper for a lot of projects. And that's the kind of thing that I think can be controlled in city code. A lot of the other stuff is building code and accessibility stuff that we can't really do much about. Those are going to apply one way or the other. But I think prioritizing getting those done as soon as possible so that people can start moving ahead with their adaptive reuse projects and start generating some TIF funds.
Thanks. John?
Mine's all superficial. I'm like, with the Hawthorne Bridge going in, I would love to see like the center median on the parkway, which the city of Bend is responsible for, get some planting done just to make it better. I'd like to see some more beautification on Franklin and tree planting on Greenwood. There's lots of empty tree wells there. And I think we can really advocate for, hey, let's make like this bridge is really an opportunity for us to turn an area that is generally a warehouse district into something that's vibrant and live, and let's do that. So I'm looking forward to the Trail Connect from Drake to Juniper talk that we have coming up.
Our next agenda item.
Yes.
Okay. Fair to say then that that's something that you're interested in being a priority then? The Drake to Juniper
Yeah, for sure.
project?
Yeah.
Okay.
gotta
Good.
think of all this stuff as arteries, and arteries breathe oxygen into areas. And so this is an opportunity to breathe some more life into this area.
Thanks, John. How about you, Elaine?
I guess from a business perspective, I would say whatever makes money for us to be able to allow us to invest in would be a priority.
Kind of the investment strategy piece that they've got,
Exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
queued up.
'Cause
Mhm.
47% of 2% seems like it's a minimal.
Fair assertion. Elisa, how about you?
I don't have a specific idea, but it revolves around safety
Mm.
in the BCD. For example, we extended our store hours during the summer. Once it starts to get dark, we shift it back. So don't want to have that concern of having our employees and customers in the area
Mhm.
after dark. That's one of the concerns, but and even as a person who just drives about, I want to feel more safe. And I think that's what I would like is what I view for the area is not a place where people drive into to go to their one stop and drive back out, but go park, ride, and just walk and feel that ability to like safely get around, whether by bike or walk or, so I know that's kind of vague and wide. Yeah, so I don't even know where to start there, but I think without that safety piece, smaller businesses, and maybe even developers, I'm not sure at that level, will invest more, will stay open more, will create that vibrant, exciting area. But I think until that piece has more attention, the safety piece, I don't know, and that includes cleaning up the streets, lights throughout. The streets are dark, and if you don't know if you're the only one on the street, that's discomforting. So,
Fair point.
yeah, I don't know where I'm going with this, but
Yeah, I mean, if I might, like, this is something I have in my comments, which sounds like it maybe mirrors yours a little bit in a slightly different way, which I think is just acknowledging a tension that exists in the district right now, which is that we have what is essentially a hub for providing services for our unhoused community members, right? We have a transitional housing space, we have wraparound services. These are the places that are also meant to transition over time, fairly short amount of time, into other sort of public service or public benefit projects, right? A lot of that is city owned. So I think what I'm hearing and something that I would like to put forth to this group is really asking the council to create a really clear roadmap and vision for tackling this kind of like tension between trying to redevelop an area and really like spark that redevelopment while also being humane and housing and providing those services for our unhoused community members. And how are those things going to work together? What's the roadmap and what's the game plan for like how those uses, if they are in fact transitioning, where are they going? Where are they going to end up? How is that going to look, right? And I think that there's sort of a bigger need, I think, for our council to provide some leadership and some vision about how that tension and how that transition is going to play out over the next 3 to 5 years to get at some of the safety issues that you're describing. But I think it's also about that desire to really keep that redevelopment potential front and center. And so we need to have a pretty proactive game plan. So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's sort of something I've also been kind of thinking about that your comment
Yeah.
sort of.
And I agree, and I
from me.
think where I differ on a lot of things on the board is that I'm looking more short term
Mm,
compared to what you're talking about is more long term.
yeah.
And so, being a business owner in a building that I rent, it's different than if I were to own the property and
Right.
see that long-term vision. So for me, it's more like, what can we do today to make everyone feel like, oh, this is a place that feels comfortable for me, or I will travel across town to go to this area to spend time, money,
Yeah.
and hang out, as opposed to drive through it as quickly and safely as possible.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's where my comment differs, is
Right,
that
there's
it's
a little
of
bit more
short
immediate.
term. Mhm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
It was
Thanks,
funny,
Lisa.
when you were talking, it made me think of, like, I think more long-term, I guess. It's like, I want to see a future where my daughter can get out of swim practice at Juniper and walk to like Goodies downtown across the Hawthorne Bridge safely, and then end up at the library. And so it's like, how do I make that future possible, where they can leave swim practice and walk downtown?
Oh, for sure.
And feel safe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think there's things we could do now.
Yeah, heard. Thanks for putting that in the room.
This
Um,
made, this
oh.
made me think of it.
Oh, at least it's gone. Okay, here we go. Yeah.
Well, I was just, I was thinking about a lot of the things that we've been thinking about and talking about are the corridor between Juniper and Drake and the area around Second Street and the mid-down crossings, but like the core area is bigger than that. Like it's also Third Street and Fourth, and like what's happening with the rest of the core area,
Mhm.
especially Third Street, where there's like a giant barrier, and how is that going to work with like what's the city's plan with it?
Mhm. Yeah. Okay, let's go to, we'll do Rachel, then Sarah, and then we'll bring it home over here with Sharon. And then I've got a few thoughts to add.
Well, I got 4 buckets. They're kind of high level. And so one just mirrors what John said, that basically construct the Juniper to Drake Park connection. The next is related to transportation as well. And it's a little bit broader than one that's in there now. It's construct the Hawthorne Bridge, inclusive of community spaces on the east and west side of the bridge to facilitate community connection. That's something that Kathy and I have spoken about, like outside this meeting, just how can we make that be a literal and a figurative connection in our community? And then it'd be great, we're talking all about complete communities, if there was some goals aligned around complete communities. So I have 2 suggestions with that regard. And one's very broad. So work towards creation of a complete community in the core area, inclusive of housing, commercial, parks and recreation. And then second, complete communities related to leveraging city-owned land in the core area to build a new city hall and develop a public plaza, open space and partnership within Parks and Rec. So those are just some high level ideas I'll throw out.
Thank you. Sarah, how about you?
Hi. So not totally fully formed, but I think the 2 kind of big buckets, as I'm hearing everybody talk here, for us would be to look at how some of these strategies overlap and integrate with the city's overall economic development plan. There's some work going on, as most of you know, with like a target sector industry analysis that will feed into an economic development plan that will feed into a review of industrial land need and commercial land need and things like that. So how do the things that we're talking about here integrate and overlap, and how can the core area be an integral part of the city's economic development plan? And I think an important part of that is infrastructure. And so ties into our conversation last time about fully funding some of the existing projects, and then how do we look towards more holistic funding for the core area in general. And then that ties into kind of my second point, is how do we help unlock some of the infill development opportunities? There was a great presentation last night at council from the housing department about some of the things that they're looking at to unlock some of the smaller scale development needs. So I think, to your point, Rachel, about completing some of these complete communities and things like that, how can core and the core area and CAB better integrate and participate with some of these other things that are going on in other city departments to make sure that there's a real keen focus on investments and prioritization of the core area in the city's overall economic development and planning activities.
Thank you. Well said. Let's come around to Sharon.
I guess the basic level is we are only going to be successful if we see development then flows money back into the core area.
Right.
And the investment strategy is key, I think, for that. And to the extent that other initiatives, programs that the council may implement take away from the money that flows into the core area, I think making sure that that impact on the core area is considered whenever there's a new investment strategy, I mean, a new initiative. I mean, I think MUPTI is a good example because dollar for dollar, that takes money out of the core area. I'm not saying it's a bad, you know, it's good goals, but we have to make sure that that gets balanced because we're only going to be successful and have money to invest in the core if we have development. So removing barriers to development, incentivizing development.
Yep.
Spurring development through some public infrastructure investment.
Great. Other thoughts from folks that other comments have brought up for you that you want to share? I definitely share some of the points that have been brought forth. I have kind of a list of things I also want to kind of put in the room. So I think that delivering on the Midtown crossings, right, especially for this next 2-year span is key, right? Like those are all slated to be pretty much done, built, delivered, right? With Hawthorne sort of having a potentially slightly longer timeline, but I think keeping our council and borough very focused on delivering those in a timely way, you know, hopefully on budget and on time is just a really important thing for what we need to accomplish here. To that end, Hawthorne can't be a bridge to nowhere. And so we really need to have the game plan for what each ending of that bridge is going to look like and how we're going to move people safely and comfortably through those routes, whether it's a quick build, whether it's something more extensive, whatever it can look like. I think really needs to be a top priority so that when that facility is in place, like we in fact have ways to move people safely through it. So not a question of like, if that will happen, but where it will happen and really having our community and all the people who are going to be both impacted and enjoying that facility participate in like what that can look like. I feel like continuing to have this council really prioritize both in their kind of prioritization, but investments in the BCD. So we know that there's these really kind of big ticket infrastructure projects that, you know, a lot of housing and more redevelopment is stuck behind. So the central sewer is the one that I'm thinking of specifically. So I'd really love to see the city council because that's kind of a potentially a legislative strategy, but also just a general priority about like figuring out how we get some of those bigger ticket items done in this area because that continued public investment is really going to ultimately unlock some of that private investment we really need to, that we really need to see. Because at the end of the day, we just need a whole lot more people to be calling this place home. And so to kind of plus one on like all the things that folks have already said about removing barriers to the development we want to see, providing the right incentives, I think we just have to remain like keep our focus there to really like make sure that we're doing the things we can to bring the vision to life. And like that housing piece is just so critical. I think that being said, there's been kind of like a mention of some of the safety issues, both short-term and long-term. I've already spoken to that. And then I think there's another kind of like opportunity, again, probably more like a legislative opportunity around the transportation package and discussion that I think is, again, germane to moving Drake to Juniper forward. That if we're really pushing and urging the city and borough, right, to explore those avenues for funding that help us move these infrastructure projects forward more quickly, I do think that that has connections to, you know, what the city might be looking at or are considering as they set their kind of legislative priorities for this session, because it could be a big opportunity for housing infrastructure, transportation infrastructure. So that might be a good one to kind of put forth. Oh, and then, sorry, one more plug. Identifying like where are the parks going, right? Like we know City Hall's got this kind of like 2030 look, right? But I think like we really like need to start figuring out where other parts of this puzzle are going. And I think that would be a good place for us to be sort of thinking about like what can that look like? Where's that going to go in the next couple of years? So that's my list.
Any other thoughts? I think everybody spoke, right?
I think we got everybody.
Okay, I tried to draft your feedback into like 5 council goal ideas and 2 borough ideas. The borough ones are a little vague, so I may ask you to
further elaborate.
further elaborate. But I'll share my screen here. Okay. Hopefully this is readable. So council goal ideas, and anyway, hopefully I kind of incorporated everything I had to do some like shifting around. But first idea is really like spurring development and unlocking infill development opportunities. And I heard kind of two main themes. There's continuing the work of identifying and adopting code changes to remove barriers to that adaptive reuse project, specifically in the BCP. And then the second one that I really heard come up was around housing and how do we continue to attract housing development and support policy or legislative asks that would help encourage housing in the core area. So whether that's, infrastructure or actual housing program asks at a lobbying level at the state, but also local policy. How could we unlock infill opportunities? Then the second one was sort of around Midtown crossings. So continuing to maintain momentum on the existing Midtown crossings projects and keep those projects on time and in budget. I tried to also kind of incorporate John's input on this of like including beautification, like with a focus on trees within those projects. And I might we don't have any control over the parkway. So if you're okay with me.
The center of the parkway is City of Bend responsibility.
Is it?
I want to say that there is
IGA.
I confirmed with Abbas.
Okay, well, I'll keep the Parkway median on there, but just including more beautification, specifically in those Midtown crossings and like a specific call out for more trees. And then council to advance the vision for how we connect to the Hawthorne Bridge. And specifically kind of advancing those ideas on the Juniper to Drake Park connections. Okay, third area was focus on enhancing like a sense of safety in the Bend Central District. And I kind of kept this separate from the next item. And that's kind of more specifically on like cleanups, lighting, things that could potentially be done on a sooner timeline. And then the
Maybe
fourth
add, like,
concept.
maybe like increase security or enhance more. Yeah.
Like a police presence.
Yeah.
And then the fourth item is creating a clear roadmap for the Bend Central District's transformation. So kind of highlighting, how do we get from its current use, particularly as a social service hub, to its planned civic uses, while also ensuring a continuation of those social services and a transition plan for that. Continuing to talk about facilitating community connections on the east and west sides of Bend, and I think I need to add how to create a complete community with like housing, parks, civic business uses, and we could specifically call out like identifying a BCD park location because I heard that come up from two of you. And then the last one, this was kind of from Sarah, how can core area goals also be integrated into the city's economic development strategy as it relates to infrastructure, target sectors, incentives, et cetera? That was a lot. Is that did that feel like I captured sort of all the feedback from everyone? And then the two borough ideas, this is a lot more vague, but generally just what I heard from Elaine was just any investments that will generate more revenue for the core area and encouraging development through that investment strategy. I don't know if you have any like ideas for how to integrate maybe some of your council goal ideas or create any more specificity around things that you'd like to see in that investment strategy to help kind of guide staff as we're working on that. But
I have a question, and it may have happened already, but we do a lot of like hypothesizing and assumptions around what developers are wanting to happen first before, like if we do this, if we provide this incentive, if we, and I'm wondering if there's a way to find out what they want and kind of, get a better understanding of what would truly incentivize development.
We could ask Dale.
Yeah, Dale.
Pretty simple answer. It's return on investment. And right now,
Oh,
there's
let's
too
get
many things
those
that drive
interest
that
rates
down.
down.
That would help. Cost down. Yeah. Ultimately,
SDCs.
I mean, ultimately, you're asking people to spend their money on something that's inherently very risky. And unless there's enough, reward for that risk, I mean, people aren't going to do it. And right now, that's our problem.
For sure. But
Yeah.
I think more like details and steps and
Mhm.
priorities and yeah, and instead of us just like constantly, how about this? And will this work? Do you like this idea that we?
Yeah, and Sarah has
Yeah,
her
Sarah's-
hand
yeah.
raised. I just thought I could also go, but Sarah, go ahead.
I was wondering maybe we can build off of the developer survey that you did last year, Ally. I don't know if this group was privy to too much of the information. I know you shared it with BDAB, but just to the degree that maybe we could customize some of that outreach and follow up with the developer survey.
Yeah, I think we can sort of add like some type of market study or developer surveys to kind of get a better sense of what is needed. We did do development feasibility analysis when we set up the core area that identified kind of some key barriers that we've made some policy adjustments to. I know Jonathan specifically mentioned that we want to do sort of a neighborhood services market study. And we could probably also talk to our housing department. They received pretty large grants to look at, how to remove barriers to housing and ensure that there's coordination between the housing programs of like, how do we elevate the core area in the things that they're looking at.
Helene, and then we'll go to Sarah.
Threshold ROI that would be a go, no-go for you?
6%.
Probably higher than 6%. I mean, you can put money in a bank and get
Right.
4.5 or 5. So why would you go do
You don't
that?
have the risk. But
Yeah.
what would it be for you? Just out of curiosity, we wouldn't hold you to it, but I'm curious what that threshold would be.
It's going to be different for everybody in every kind of project. So, I mean,
Range?
throwing a number out there. And it depends on how you count it. Is it just internal rate of return or is it, there's all kinds of different ways to look at it. So yeah, I'm going to decline to throw a number out there. And that's not really what I focus on is the business.
Fair
anyway,
enough.
so.
I just think if we start looking at what that threshold might be in a general way, in a range, then that gives us a way of assessing different projects and saying, prioritizing which ones are going to actually bring that in and be able to attract the developers that will be investing.
So to your point, and I think Dell just summed it up pretty succinctly with comparison between real estate property and investments, either in a high yield savings account. So Ally and I understand this now. A lot of developers right now are doing development and then they'll hit a stabilization year and they'll sell the asset. They don't hold it. So their return on investment is a lot different than those who want to hold the investment or being community members. Another thing that we're trying to pivot, and this is something we've heard from both our borough/council members and also our community members, is we want incentives to be something that we get back, not only in terms of revenue, but also a community benefit. So we're really trying to pivot incentives being kind of handouts to being something that spurs self-sufficiency, but then also generates returns both financially for borough, taxing districts, et cetera, but then also provides a community benefit. So we're really trying to move away from just like incentivizing to incentivize because we know that that's not good fiscal stewardship, right? And so to some of the points that's already been made, I think, when the core area was established, the study was done prior to the pandemic. Oh, no, excuse me, during the pandemic. The markets are now adjusting. We had a budget kickoff on Monday. They've identified that our growth is starting to slow. Our population growth is starting to decrease. So I think it would behoove this group to help guide borough in some of these market feasibility studies before more incentives get put on the table. Because it's nice to have a beautiful downtown, but if there's not a use to be associated with it, it's just throwing money after throwing money, right? So it's that chicken and the egg thing. Does the development come prior to it being pretty? Or does the development come, same thing with infrastructure, right? It's you build spec buildings. Sometimes they come, sometimes they don't. So I think in the next year, we want to really gather that data and start making true decisions, but then doing, like, to some of your points up here, that strategic investments that you can do in the interim as we kind of do the strategic development plan for the economic development strategy. So, yeah.
Thank you, Dale. Didn't mean to put you on the spot. I was just curious.
Well, it's also, I mean, there's different kinds of things. I mean, like the platform project or 181 Franklin. I mean, those are home run kind of projects. And if you're swinging for those all the time, you're going to miss mostly. I think the adaptive reuse or the little bits of snowball that we get rolling, and it kind of makes the area a little more attractive. People come to the bookstore, they go to cool shop that's next door to it. And then you start, you just got to get the snowball rolling a little bit, and eventually it gets big. But, you know, and somebody's going to spend 50, $60 million. It's like, oof, you know, you want pretty good assurances that you're going to get your money back, let alone make any profit on it for the amount of effort and time. And
Sarah, you still have your hand raised. Is that?
I do, yeah. It was just kind of a follow-up of what I said prior, but I was thinking, and this maybe not is not a borough or a council goal, but more like a work process for the group, but maybe some joint meetings with other advisory boards like the Affordable Housing Committee or the Economic Development Advisory Board, just because there is overlap with the work that we are doing and they are doing. And so better understanding how all of our entities and our shared goals, we can work together towards them. That might be helpful to help kick off the new biennium and some of our work.
Yeah, I think that's good suggestion, Sarah.
Will we get at some of that in the council or committee summit that was described on for January 14th? Or will that be, this will be-
All the advisory boards will be present at that, so it's a great opportunity for you all to like network and meet some of the advisory board members, and then you'll hear from each one at that summit kind of what their goals are, and I think it will naturally sort of occur through that process a little bit. But there, we could also strategize about how do we set up, you know, joint CAB BDAB meetings at like an annual point, or you know, joint AHAC CAB meetings at some point.
All right, folks, other thoughts, comments? I feel like, at least from my perspective, Allison's captured it pretty well here. Any adjustments, additions?
So if we could have some type of like formal motion for me to kind of take this input and use it for your council goal summit, then I can kind of work on filling out the sheet for CAB with this info.
Great. Could we get a motion to move forward with taking this document and turning it into a new version for council goal setting?
so moved.
I second.
So Dale with the motion and Elisa with the second. Thank you.
Better make the minutes.
Yeah, you're in the minutes, man. That's right. Okay, well, good. Well, we will go ahead then and move. Oh, sorry, excuse me. And all in favor? And opposed? All right. Unanimous?
I'm going to hop over to this computer in case my computer dies really quick, so just bear with me a second.
Quick moving. Okay, well, we're moving on to People Streets. So this is going to be the Juniper to Drake Park case study. I have about 30 minutes for this one, maybe a little bit longer, since I don't know if our public comment will be terribly long tonight, but yeah. Take it away, Ally.
And I'll kind of provide just a general update on the study. We've started to draft some concepts for the Juniper to Drake Park case study that we've started to preview with stakeholders. So Dale participated in kind of an east side of the case study working group to get input. And I would just say that it's still sort of a, thank you. It's still a working draft that we're not quite ready to, we need to make some adjustments to some of the case study slides. And so we aren't able to kind of show those more publicly until more revisions are made, but just know that I'll kind of provide an update on the project and then kind of where we're at. So the really the goal of the project is to define what, how, and when low CAR districts, which are required in new state land use and planning rules, will be allowed in Bend, including next steps, policies, and actions such as like future development code or street standard changes, just as examples that would need to be necessary to kind of support these low CAR districts, or what we're calling people streets. And what we're doing is we're kind of looking at best practices for what we're seeing in other communities around these types of streets that really prioritize walking and rolling uses, and in some cases limit or restrict vehicular access, so that we can kind of identify some new street types. And then we're taking those new street types and actually like testing them on a real route so that we can understand some tension points or some areas where the city might like lack current policies or lack programs where we would need to build up to support implementation of some of these new street types. So it will result sort of in a policy recommendations and next steps report. So we're about,
Question.
yeah.
What did you mean by allowed?
The rules state like we don't have to, we're not like forcing these new districts everywhere across the city, but we have to allow for them. So our development code and our standards have to allow for the development of low CAR districts that include either no CAR or low CAR streets is what the rules say. And they have to be allowed in all of our mixed use and residential areas, but kind of under like what conditions is up for the individual jurisdiction to decide.
So like for local roads as opposed to electors and arterials? Or speak to that at all?
So when we've met with the Department of Land Conservation and Development to kind of get a sense, it only applies to cities that are over 100,000 in population in Oregon. And so we've kind of done some group listening sessions with all the cities that are looking at these rules. What DLC kind of specifically said is like, if a development like cul-de-sac in Tempe, Arizona, have you heard of that development? It's like a no CAR development. If they were to come to Bend and propose a no CAR development, you would need to have standards in place that provide a path forward for that, as an example. But probably still need to be thinking about, how is that development served with transit, and where can people access it with a vehicle? How does that integrate into the existing city? So there is not a lot of
Meat on the bone.
meat in the rules themselves.
So in multi-use and residential districts.
In mixed use and residential districts, yeah.
Interesting.
So the grant that for the study was from DLCD, right?
Mhm.
And then do you have to report out on changes or anything at the end of the study? Or
Yeah, we have to provide them all the deliverables that we produce that were a part of our grant agreement in order to get the funding reimbursed to the city for the grant. Any other questions? So we're about halfway through the study. I would say the goal is to wrap up by May of 2025. We've already reviewed sort of best practices and developed some draft street types and started applying those to the case study. And then we've began to do some engagement as part of this project. Our open house for the project is planned for next Friday, so I'll send out the invite to all of you. It'll be taking place next Friday from 2:30 to 4:30 p.m. at the Commons Cafe over in like Brooks Alley in the Commons Plaza. And we'll be both like kind of inside and outside. We'll have some boards and information and activities. It's intended to be kind of a family-friendly event. The open house does not include a lot of information on the case study. We'll likely provide follow-up opportunities for folks that get engaged at the open house to attend something when we're further along in the case study. So just wanted to kind of talk a little bit. Again, I think I presented these at the last meeting, but these are sort of the 4 different street types that we're looking at. And thinking about how these could apply in Bend moving forward. So on the left side of the screen, these are streets that we think would be more appropriate in more commercial, denser, mixed-use environments, similar to a downtown or, I think what we hope the Bend Central District will look like in the future. And then kind of as you move further right on the screen, this is going to be more appropriate in like less dense environments or even more residential neighborhoods. And then even kind of the type of the user. So on the left side of the screen, the Plaza Street, that's where vehicular uses may actually be restricted or limited to just emergency service vehicle access or, pickup delivery needs for businesses. A shared street environment is going to have more of that vehicular access, but the speeds are really, vehicles are really de-emphasized through the design of the street. A low car and a greenway street are probably going to be more appropriate for kind of bike connectivity areas. And a greenway street is kind of more of that like local street that provides, low speeds for vehicles and feels safer for walking and biking compared to like a standard local street section today. So these are kind of the different street types that will be presented at the open house and that we're taking and applying to the case study. And sorry, I don't have like a ton of information on the case study. I know some of you have seen like previews of it, but we still kind of want to refine some things.
Just a quick question. I noticed that some municipalities are having a universal speed limit of like 25 miles an hour implemented in their city limits, or getting rid of jaywalking violations entirely. Is that part of this, or?
We haven't identified those as like supportive policy or program areas yet, but it could certainly like come up for something for us to evaluate. I'm not part of our transportation and mobility department, so I don't know if that's something, I don't think that's something that we've looked at currently. I'm looking at legal.
Not part of this study. It's been limited to DLCD grant funded, kind of looking at comp plan, TSP changes, land use regulations, standards and specs. What you just described would probably fall outside of that, might be supportive.
Michael, I might, if you're going to keep
Oh.
talking for a while, I might have you come to.
Yeah. What you described may be supportive, but it would be outside the scope of this study. This study is really just looking at land use regs. Yeah. And on the, Alyssa, on the deliverables question, I just wanted to quickly clarify, what we're delivering is a report. So there's not an implementation of any of this under this study. It's just a report that says, here are the things we looked at, pros, cons, options, and then what implementation might look like. There won't actually
In the
be,
future.
there won't actually be implementation out of this study.
What is the implementation?
What'd you say?
When is the
Is it-
implementation supposed
I have to check the OAR. I don't know when we're required under the OAR.
We have to comply with this
implement
when we
it.
update the transportation system plan,
Yeah,
which we're
but I don't know
planning
when
to do
that
2026
is.
through 2027.
Yeah. But years in advance. Yeah.
Yeah, and part of, I think in an ideal world, we would have delayed doing the study closer to the TSP, but we have to do the study by spring of 2025 to use the funds from DLCD. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think like, because I think one of my pet peeves is like doing studies, right? And then they sit on a shelf and gather dust and never get implemented. And so I think even if it is in 26, 27, like the pathway for implementation is through the TSP update so that we have something coming from the study that allows us to get here, right? So just to clarify, like it's not just a study to do a study, like there is a pathway and like that's where we have the community conversation, right, about our TSP, about like where does it show up? How does it show up? Right? Like, how does it get implemented? So there's a pathway there for implementation.
And it may be that what we find in this study is that it has to be TSP changes. There may be other things we can do within the existing TSP. It could just be land use regs. It could be standards and specs. It could be a whole suite of changes. Some may require a comp plan or TSP change. Some may just be implementable in the standards and specs. The purpose of this is to figure that out. What are the options? What might we want to do? And then how do we do that?
Yeah, that's kind of all I have to update you on. Just the project open house, as I mentioned, is Friday, November 15th, 2:30 to 4:30 p.m. There will also be an online version available at the project webpage for about 2 weeks following the the open house. And then we are planning kind of a Juniper to Drake Park case study follow-up event and details to be announced on that. It's a little bit short of an agenda item than I was initially anticipating.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. So yeah, and then I think just lastly wanted to thank, well, I guess we need to do public comment, right?
We do.
Yeah.
And just really quick, did anyone else have questions about the People Street study or open house or process? See, all right. Rolling on then. Okay, we might actually get out a little early tonight because I'm not sure that we have any public comment, but no one here in the room. Anyone online?
There's no one online.
Okay, thank you, Gina. Okay, well, then we'll open and close the public comment period and we'll move on to our last agenda item, which is thanking our outgoing cab members.
Yeah, so Elisa and Elisa, just wanted to thank you all for all of the time that you've spent on CAB the last, I think it's 3 years, and really value all of the time that you've spent on the board. We have provided you with some certificates and mugs. So
Great.
thank you again. And then just so folks are aware, we just completed like recruitment of CAB and are planning interviews with council and the mayor in the next coming weeks. So we'll identify who those 2 new CAB members will be soon.
Great, and just a question, I know that last time we kind of had the half-day retreat to kind of onboard new members and give them the kind of 101. Is that similar thing envisioned for this next?
Yeah, I think
onboarding?
because we'll have 2 members, I'll probably set those up kind of individually with those 2 members to bring them on board, but then we'll spend a little bit of time at the first meeting kind of doing like more robust introductions or maybe and we can kind of review the council goal input that you already gave with those 2 as well.
Well, thank you both. You will be missed. It was a great experience. Thanks. Any thoughts you want to share with the group?
I still live here. I'll probably be around.
No
Your
doubt.
public commenter.
First.
Yeah.
On that side.
Save the group from no public comments.
Well, and then Sharon, you're an ex officio, but this is also your last
It
meeting.
is.
So just also want to thank you and recognize your contributions and participation. And
Appreciate that.
you serve on a lot of different boards, wear a lot of hats, and appreciate you being in the mix with us.
Pretty soon I'm gonna have a retired hat on, so
All right.
way fewer boards. And Doug is gonna be my replacement, so you need to ease him into all the acronyms.
I was Googling them while you were.
Yeah, Doug, do you want to share a little bit more about yourself at all?
I actually am an original Bend resident from 25 years ago. I actually worked for the city of Bend on the street department 25 years ago. Used to plow all the streets right before the urban growth boundary grew by 300 lane miles. And we thought that was huge at the time. And moved back east for a little while, ended up back on the West Coast, mostly over in the Valley, worked for Albany Public Schools for 15 years as the director of facilities there, and recently came back over the hill. And so I think I've been here for 1.5 years, and then Sharon decides to leave.
Well, I didn't leave when you first got
No,
here.
that's
so-
true. At least she gave me some time to pick up on some of this.
Yeah. And he's catching on, and so this will be another opportunity to learn more.
Yeah, well, welcome.
Yeah.
And thanks for making that transition pretty seamless. So appreciate that. Any other comments from the group? Okay, we'll go ahead and adjourn then. Thanks, everybody.